Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started this evening. My name is Rose Jansen. I'm with the Academy of Science St. Louis, and we're very pleased to be partnering with the St. Louis Zoo to bring you tonight's science seminar, Black Bears in Missouri. For those of you who are not familiar with the Academy of Science, I'm going to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about who we are. We're an independent science organization supported entirely through community contributions. At venues throughout the region, we connect science and the community through free and or very low cost public talks, science seminars and workshops, and trips and tours that feature scientists and engineering professionals of both national and international renown. In addition to advancing the public understanding of science, it is our mission to inspire the next generation of scientists and science advocates, which we do by offering a full array of free and low cost opportunities expressly for teens, such as our Teen Science Cafes, STEM Teens Youth Leadership Council, Junior Academy of Science, and the Regional Academy of Science St. Louis Science Fair and Honors Division. The Junior Academy is a pre-professional STEM membership organization for students from the full range of academic backgrounds in grades 6 through 12. It offers hands-on opportunities in science, engineering, and medicine. Teens can attend unique behind-the-scenes explorations of leading engineering, technology, and science labs of our region, and participate in field opportunities and challenging and engaging science competitions, now all offered virtually online. And Junior Academy members make real world connections, meeting top STEM professionals. You can find more information on the Junior Academy and all of our community wide science events and programs by visiting our website at academyofsciencestl.org, or you may also visit us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. You can sign up to receive Academy e-news on our website, again at academyofsciencestl.org, or you can jot your email address down in the online program survey, which will pop up in the chat a couple times this evening before you leave. I do want to mention one event that you might have an interest in attending next Thursday evening, December 10 at 7, also at 7 p.m. via Zoom. You can join us for What Can Evolutionary Biology Tell Us About the Origin and Spread of Human Agriculture with Dr. Carlos Botero. He's an assistant professor of biology with the Department of Biology at Washington University in St. Louis. This event is free and open to the public, and you can register for the Zoom link to join on our website at academyofscience.stl.org/events. So I do want to let you know before I introduce our speaker this evening that we do have everyone's microphone turned off. So if you have questions for our speaker tonight, you'll want to go ahead and pop those into the chat window, and then I'll moderate those questions after she finishes speaking, and we'll ask all of our questions at that point in time. And again, we have a program survey, an online program survey. We'll pop that link into the chat window a couple times tonight, and we ask that you fill that out before you leave tonight. Let us know what you thought about tonight's event, and or if there are topics that you would like to hear about in the future. So with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce this evening's speaker. So our speaker tonight is Laura Conlee. Laura is the Furbearer Biologist for the Missouri Department of Conservation. She received her undergraduate degree from Northern Illinois University and her MS from Southern Illinois University, where she studied space use and habitat selection of long-tailed weasels. Laura worked for the Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife for 8 years as the Furbearer and Black Bear project leader before coming to MDC in 2016. She currently oversees MDC's Black Bear Research Program, is co-chair of the Large Carnivore Response Team, and monitors fur-bear and bear populations to inform management decisions. Laura has worked with black bears since 2010, with the primary focus of conducting research to inform management decisions, and we are very pleased to have her here with us tonight to talk about black bears in Missouri. And with that said, I think we're going to stop sharing our screen. So Laura, you can share yours.
Okay. All right, so let me get up to the first slide and then we can go ahead and get going here. All right. Can you see that, Rose? Yep, okay. Well, good. Well, I'll go ahead and get started here. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me. I certainly appreciate the invitation and the flexibility with rescheduling given the COVID situation and things like that. I feel like we scheduled this presentation a long time ago and it got rescheduled and then rescheduled. So here we are and we get to talk about bears. So I'll jump right into it. And as Rose mentioned, my name is Laura Conlee. I'm the Furbearer Biologist for the Missouri Department of Conservation. And today we'll focus our discussion on black bear. But I do work with a variety of other furbearer species. And things like coyote, fox, raccoons, the aquatic furbearers, otter and beaver and things like that. But our biggest research project going on right now that I'm participating in is our black bear research project. And there's just a lot going on with bears, and they are a very popular topic of discussion. So we'll kind of get right into it. We'll go over a bit of biology, just give kind of a basic overview of bear biology, ecology, talk about the research, and then management. Now, Missouri's bear population is connected to a much larger bear population in the central interior highlands. So here we're talking about Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma, and predominantly we're connected to that Ozark bear population within Arkansas, but we also get bears that kind of occur throughout those states into the Ouachitas of Arkansas and Oklahoma as well. And so between these three states, this bear population is pushing around 8,000 bears. And both Arkansas and Oklahoma do have growing bear populations as well. They both have hunting seasons, Arkansas establishing theirs in the 1980s and Oklahoma in 2009. But as I said, bears don't know political boundaries, so we do have bears that overlap with our neighboring states, and some of our research bears, in fact, have ranges where they do go into Arkansas a fair portion of their time and kind of move between the two states. Now, here in Missouri, primary bear range is really south of Interstate 44, and the highest densities of bears occur south of Highway 60, so the very southern third of the state. And this coincides with the largest areas of forested land that we have within the state, as well as the areas where we've had bears for the longest period of time. So Missouri historically had bears throughout the forested areas of the state, but by the early 1900s, it was really thought that bears had been extirpated due to large-scale habitat changes. So think the logging of the Ozarks, really, really big changes to forested habitat in the state, and also unregulated hunting. So bear populations were locally driven to very, very low numbers, and it was thought for a time that Missouri was absent of black bear. There were a few records here and there, but it wasn't clear if those bears were bears that had persisted or if those bears were released captives. Now, that all changed in the 1950s and 1960s when Arkansas Game and Fish had conducted a series of reintroductions into the Ozarks and Ouachitas of Arkansas, and those bears were actually brought in from Minnesota and Manitoba, so bears from the northern part of the U.S. where their populations were very abundant, down into Arkansas. And as that Arkansas bear population grew, sightings began to increase in Missouri. So from the 1950s into the 1960s, we started getting an increased number of sightings. It became apparent that some of those bears from the Arkansas release did make their way into Missouri and kind of moved through the state. But as Arkansas's population grew, bear sightings just kept ticking upward in Missouri, and over time it became apparent that we did have bears that had established ranges within our own state. Those bears were reproducing within the state, and we had that bear population that was occurring in Missouri. Now, that population, as we mentioned, the highest densities are south of Highway 60, but that core range is really south of Interstate 44. And if you look at this map here, that's really designated by that red polygon that's labeled current range. So you can see the sightings scattered throughout the southern part of the state. And if we superimposed a map of forested habitat, that would coincide with really the biggest tracts of forested land that we have in that southern part of the state. But we also have expansion areas where bears are increasing in number, sightings are becoming increasingly more common. And as most of you may have heard in the past, we've had bear sightings even south of St. Louis and southwest of St. Louis. We've had bears that have made their way into Baldwin, Eureka. We've had bears that have even crossed Interstate 70 in the Missouri River and gotten into Warren County and Montgomery County. So as that bear population continues to grow within these expansion areas, we start to see dispersing males kind of moving through and wandering through. And in most cases, south of St. Louis, these are young males that, based on their biology, actually just cover really large dispersal areas as they leave where they were born. And then when we look to the other expansion area, that blue polygon that is to the southwest of St. Louis, that area is really centered around Lake of the Ozarks. And we have established bears in this area. The numbers of bears are increasing in this area, but kind of throughout the southern half of the state, that bear range continually expands. And so each year we're getting bear reports a little bit further out from that core range as that population continues to grow. And here in 2020, we're at about 400 bear reports. And so that number does keep going up as that population continues to grow and expand. And when we do have bears that show up in some of these expansion areas, say south of St. Louis, for example, just one bear can generate a whole lot of reports, partly because it's visible, because it's moving through oftentimes residential areas, but also because it's a brand new occurrence for most folks living in these areas. This is something new. They haven't had to think about bears showing up in their neighborhood, and that often generates a lot of interest and a lot of reports. So in some of those years, you'll see kind of pockets of reports within some of these counties, and that's just one bear generally generating a whole bunch of reports as it kind of moves through that area. So just in kind of an introduction to the bear population here, and we'll get into more detail as we go through, bears are becoming increasingly more common in Missouri. So our population is growing and expanding in range. And we estimate the population to be between 540 and 840 bears statewide, and it's growing at about 9% annually. So with this growth rate, we would expect that bear population to double in about a decade. Now, bears are classified in the order Carnivora, so they're mammals. They're classified as carnivores. So if you're thinking about other carnivores, you're thinking about cats and dogs and wolves and big cats and things like that. But bears are a little bit different, and especially black bear. We classify them as carnivores, and that's because of their dentition. It's not because of their diet. So bears, black bears in particular, are primarily vegetarians. So they are classified in that order Carnivora, but that is a bit of a misnomer if you're thinking about carnivores just in the diet sense. Now, there are 8 bear species throughout the world that are living bear species right now. And the species that we have here in Missouri is Ursus americanus, and that's the Latin word for bear of America. And so black bear are only found in North America. They aren't found elsewhere in the world. So they are a species that is restricted to North America. Things like grizzly bears and polar bears occur in other parts of the world, but black bears are just a North American bear species. And they are the smallest of the North American bear species. So they are substantially smaller than grizzly bears and substantially smaller than polar bears, but their range does cover a pretty large range. They can range anywhere from just under 100 pounds to under 1,000 pounds. Generally, they aren't falling into that 900-pound category. And here in Missouri, the biggest bear that we've seen in our research project was just over 500 pounds. And for bears, that weight fluctuates quite a bit, and it's very dependent on food sources. So when bears have access to more year-round foods, they tend to exhibit those larger weights. So Florida, for example, where bears have access to foods that are pretty much year-round, those bears tend to be a bit heavier than what we see here. Now, most black bears are black with tan muzzles, but they do come in a variety of different colors. And we often get questioned, what type of bear did I see? It was brown in color. Did I see a grizzly bear? And the answer is no. We only have black bears here in the state, but we do have a variety of different colors that you'll see. So the bear on the left in this slide is a cinnamon phased bear. The bear on the right, that very light colored, is a blonde phased bear. The yearling that's behind it is a black phased bear. And then the sow in this picture is actually more on the brown side, and it kind of depends on how the sunlight is hitting her. But we see the whole gamut, anywhere from blonde all the way to that jet black in color. We do not have white black bears here. Those occur in the Pacific Northwest in very specific areas. But otherwise, we see the whole range in color patterns that you would see within the species black bear. And so that kind of often generates a little bit of confusion for folks, but there are only black bears here. We don't have grizzly bears here, but we do have that wide color variation. And we also see white chest blazes. So on the front of the chest, we'll have bears that have some white hairs, and it can be just a couple of hairs that occur on the chest, all the way to very large V shapes, U shapes, big circular patterns that cover their entire chest. And so there's a lot of variability in those pelt patterns. And the chest blaze that they're born with is the chest blaze that they'll exhibit throughout their life. It just gets bigger with them as they get bigger also. And one of the key characteristics for black bears is really that sloped forehead and their round, erect ears. So if you're trying to decide, is it a black bear or is it a grizzly bear? One of the key factors that you would look at for a grizzly bear is the shoulder hump. So black bears do not have that characteristic shoulder hump that grizzly bears have. And black bears' heads are much more sloped and their ears are much more noticeable. Now, the thing with black bears, though, as they get older, their head actually continues to grow wider. And so in these two pictures here, you can see those ears are very noticeable. They're rounded ears, they're upright, and they're very noticeable. Now, as bears get older, the size of their ears starts to look a little bit smaller relative to the overall size of their head. So that's one way that you could look at a bear and kind of decide, is it a younger bear or is it an older bear? So with those older bears, oftentimes those ears look quite a bit smaller. The younger bears, the ears look almost kind of large and floppy, especially on the really young bears. But as they get bigger, that head shape continues to grow wider. Now, as we talked about, bears are classified as carnivores. However, they are not primarily meat eaters. So the vast majority of their diet is mostly vegetarian. Now, they are omnivorous and they're opportunistic omnivores. So they take advantage of what is easiest and most abundant, and that's very, very seasonal. So their diet shifts throughout the year as food availability changes, and they're very adaptable in the foods that they can eat, and they consume a wide variety of foods. Now, in the spring, when they exit their winter den, there's not a whole lot of foods available, and so they will often seek out wetlands where that first emergent vegetation comes up. They will graze on grasses at the edge of the woodlands while they are waiting for the rest of those summer foods to come in. And then as those summer foods kick in, they start feeding on berries and insects. When food is sparse, they may feed on carrion in the spring and early summer when deer fawns are born. They have the potential to feed on deer fawns. Now, some of the studies that have looked at that highlight that it's not the population as a whole that seeks out that type of food, but more of a bear stumbles upon a fawn, happens to develop that search image, and then you might have one bear that would use that as a food source. But deer fawns especially are not a primary food source for bears. It's really the berries and the insects and things like that. As the summer grows on, berries become more abundant and they become a really, really important food source. So during the months of June and July, when blackberries and wild raspberries ripen, bears will switch over and they will almost exclusively feed on those types of food sources. And it's actually quite interesting when a bear comes into one of those blackberry patches, you would think, this is a 200 to 300 pound animal that's feeding on what seems like quite delicate vegetation and in this quite delicate type of patch. But they do a really good job going in, and they have protruding lips that can protrude out and pluck the berries without doing damage to the canes. And they feed on the ripe berries. They leave the rest of them and they'll come back and feed on those when they ripen. And so they'll sit in the patch and feed on berries almost exclusively, to the point where during the summer months, if you have a really abundant berry crop, their scat almost contains exclusively those berries and almost looks like jelly rather than what you would think of as bear scat. And then as other seeds come into play, that can also be used as a food source. And then bears, this picture down here in the right-hand corner, shows how they kind of play this role as a forest decomposer. So when they are out there searching for insects, they have very, very powerful front claws and front paws, and they will go in and they will tear up rotten logs looking for insect and insect larvae within those rotten logs. They will overturn logs, they'll overturn rocks looking for grubs and things like that. They will even dig up ground wasps' nests and ground hornets' nests and eat the larvae. And so they really do play that role in forest decomposition. And it's amazing to think that such a large animal can sustain itself on berries and insects during the summer months. Now, when we have dry spells and say our berry crop isn't as good, bears will look for alternate food sources, and sometimes that means they're out there looking for easy meals in neighborhoods and things like that. So this is where we get bears that wander into neighborhoods. They're looking for bird feeders or wildlife feeders, trash, barbecue grills, and things like that. And we'll talk a bit more about that when we touch on the be bear aware and what you should think about if you live in an area with bears or have a bear that's moving through the neighborhood. And then in the fall, they switch over to the fall berries, so things like cherries and sassafras berries and things like that. And then tree mast, so hard mast like acorns, is a super, super important food source. And that is really the food source that helps bears build up their fat stores so that they can make it through the winter without feeding for anywhere from 3 to 6 months, depending on where you are in North America. And so that tree mast, that hard mast, is a really, really important food source. Now, once bears enter the fall, so generally around late August, early September, bears enter a period of hyperphagia. And this means basically they are gorging themselves. They are focused entirely on eating. They will spend up to 20 hours a day feeding. They are trying to consume about 20,000 calories per day. And this allows them to pack on that substantial weight then that gets them through the winter months. But when you think about it, they are expending that energy looking for those natural foods. And so there are some bears that will go to those easy human associated foods, because a bear can get its daily caloric intake, that 20,000 calories, from a bag of dog food. And so it's not surprising that when bears develop that pattern of behavior and they seek out those human associated foods, they can rely pretty heavily on them and come back and revisit those areas over and over again, because it's an easy meal. They don't have to expend, excuse me, a lot of energy to get to it. And bears are generally regarded as having relatively poor eyesight. They would see a person hiking on the trail, they can see other animals in the woods, but if you're comparing their eyesight to their sense of smell, it's no contest. Their sense of smell is better than a dog's sense of smell, and they can use that sense of smell to really seek out those food sources. So whether it's catching wind of the actual food source, or even following the scent of another bear that may have stepped in some of that food and is now tracking that scent through the forest. They have the ability to do that. And that's how they move through these large tracts of forested land, seeking out those food sources. And that sense of smell is really important if you have patchy food on the landscape. So in years where your acorn crop might be a little bit patchy, bears rely on that sense of smell to really be able to move across really large areas looking for those food sources. And bears are generally regarded as a forest-dwelling species, so they require forested habitat to meet their living needs and meet their energetic requirements. Now here, when we think about Missouri, you're generally thinking about the Ozark region, generally thinking about south of the Missouri River, but bears are capable of using areas that have more fragmented forests, and oftentimes when human habitation fragments that forest, it kind of creates the perfect storm. So if you have high-quality bear habitat that's then fragmented by the human environment, it often increases the chances that bears might come into contact with residential areas, seek out those human associated food sources and things like that. Now we have a low density bear population here in Missouri. Our bears cover a large geographic area, and as that population continues to grow, that density will increase. But right now our bears are quite choosy. When we look at the habitat information, the habitat use information that we have from our research projects, we can see that our bears here in Missouri are selecting the highest quality large tracts of forested land. Now, as that population grows and bears get pushed into more marginal habitats, they will select some of their, they will start to use some of those more marginal habitats. And we can look at higher density bear populations in more fragmented areas in the eastern United States, where you have bears that use very small wooded patches and then go into neighborhoods and feed and go back and forth. And so just kind of an idea of what that might look like on the landscape. If you look at the photo of the map on the right, basically you can see these larger tracts of connected forest, and then right through that you have this a road with homes and houses, and those houses but right up against the woods. So in these situations, you could have a bear that is using those natural environments, moving through that natural landscape, and just happens upon a backyard. And if they find those easy meals, they often develop that search image where now they, instead of visiting one yard, may visit the next yard and the next yard and the next yard, and they start to take advantage of some of those food sources. So it's really important just knowing that we do have human areas that kind of coincide with that bear habitat, to be bear aware, make sure you're not providing those food sources for bears. And as that population grows and expands, we do have bears that show up in some of those more marginal habitats. And when we think about habitat connectivity, we're talking about the connection of those forested tracts. So that could be river corridors. Sometimes it's even railroad corridors that have forest along those railroad corridors. But in many cases, we're really thinking about river corridors here. And when you think about south of St. Louis, you have a fair number of large rivers, creeks, and streams that have wooded corridors that kind of provide that good connectivity. So as these young bears are moving across the landscape, it's not surprising that in many cases they are showing up in some of these areas because the habitat corridors that they can follow basically lead them right to that. Now, bears go through an interesting phase in their biology, and this is something that doesn't occur with a lot of other mammals. So bears go through a period of inactivity, and it can last anywhere from 3 to 6 months, kind of depending on where they occur in North America. The further north you go, the longer bears den. The further south, the shorter amount of time those bears would den. And that's really for bears that are either by themselves, or so male bears, young females, or female bears with yearlings, so female bears with cubs that are about 1 year old. They can remain active during the winter, but they generally, especially here in Missouri, what we see, they generally find a den location, hole up for a little while. They might move around a bit. They might move around close to that den site, but they're generally staying at that den site anywhere from early to mid-November into December, all the way up until February or March. And a lot of it depends on food availability. So when bears enter that winter den, it's starting to become more costly to continue to search for food. And so as it becomes more costly to find food, their body physiology changes. They'll enter that winter den, and at that point, they're not eating, they're not drinking, and they're not urinating or defecating. Now, bears also give birth in these winter dens. So females will enter the winter den and they'll give birth in that winter den, and they'll actually stay in that winter den with those newborn cubs almost till the end of March, sometimes early April, before they start moving around quite a bit. So they really are in that den period for quite some time. Now, bears are not considered true hibernators. And so a true hibernator, their body temperature drops very low, but they go through periods of warming and periods of activity where they get up, they move around, they will eat, and then their body temperature drops back down. And this is an adaptation to make it through the winter. So a chipmunk is an example of a true hibernator. Now, if you found a chipmunk when their body temperature was dropped down very, very low, it would take a really long time for that chipmunk to warm up to the point where it could start moving. It's not the case for bears. So for bears, their body temperature does decrease, but it doesn't decrease the same way that a chipmunk does. And their heart rate and breathing rate does decrease substantially. So they have much lower breathing, much lower heart rate, and their metabolism drops down to about 40% of what their normal metabolism is. And during this time period, when they are in this more winter dormancy period, they can be roused easily. So when we're studying and visiting these winter dens to look at reproduction and survival, the bears know that we're there. Oftentimes they're looking at us, they're aware, and they can get up and move. So there isn't a need for them to warm themselves back up or anything like that. They can get up, they can move very easily, but they're generally not eating, drinking, urinating, or defecating during that time period. And their body actually serves as a recycling system. So all of that fat that they built up over the course of the fall is what gets them through the winter months. That fat gets broken down into energy. That's the energy that they use to meet those daily needs for breathing and heart rate and things like that. But they're not making waste. And so their body is essentially recycling the waste products of burning that fat. And it's believed that it's replenishing their muscles and their bones. So when bears go through this period of winter dormancy, when they are in that winter den for upwards of 6 months, they don't experience bone loss, they don't experience muscle loss. If a human were to be inactive to that effect for even a week, we would start to experience negative effects on our body from that inactivity. Bears don't experience those negative effects. So essentially, they are a fine-tuned machine. Their body is a fine-tuned machine during that time, recycling the waste products and everything, and making it so they can survive those winter months without eating or drinking. And female bears that enter the den pregnant actually will give birth in that den, and they are relying on those fat stores to produce enough milk for the cubs and to be able to keep themselves alive during those winter months. Bears also have a really neat physiological trait that's called delayed implantation. So the mating season for bears actually occurs in the summer months. And that's part of the reason we see a lot of movement during the summer months. Male bears during the mating season cover huge distances. They cover these very, very large breeding ranges, and they move around quite a bit. So the mating season occurs in June and July. The embryo starts to develop, and then it gets paused. And so over the course of time, as the bear continues to build up its fat stores, if it goes into the den in good body condition, it's believed that that embryo then implants, and the bear then carries that pregnancy through the winter and gives birth to those cubs around February. If the bear goes into the den in really poor body condition, then the embryo reabsorbs and the bear does not have cubs in the den. So kind of an evolutionary trait to be able to survive that winter. And that reproduction in that den is taxing. So for these bears, they can have a litter of 1 to 4 cubs in areas of higher productivity. In the Northeast, there's been bears that have had up to 5 cubs. And so you're talking these bears are basically surviving the winter on those fat stores, as well as creating enough milk to sustain those litters. So that's something that would be quite impossible if the bear went into the den in really poor body condition. And those den sites generally are thought to protect bears from adverse weather conditions, but we see a variety of different den types here. So we have, when you think of the Missouri Ozarks, karst topography is something that often jumps out. We have a lot of caves here in Missouri, and we certainly do have bears that den in caves, but they don't exclusively den in caves. So, when you think about what you were told as a kid, what a bear den looks like, you picture that big cave with the leaf nest down at the bottom of the cave kind of thing. And we do see that, but we also have bears that den in down trees or tree cavities, as you could see in the top right photo. We have bears that create ground nests. So literally raking up a pile of leaves up against a log, or sometimes even in a briar thicket, and they sit in that leaf nest, and they can give birth to cubs in that nest. They can survive the winter in that nest. They can rear cubs in that nest, but very unprotective compared to what you would think of as those ground dens or those rock caves in the tree cavities and things like that. But we see the whole suite of den types here in Missouri. And I jumped ahead a bit. We talked about that reproduction and the breeding season. So it is quite interesting, though, that bears go through this delayed implantation. There are a couple of other species that go through delayed implantation. Weasels happen to be one of those. So I've been lucky enough to work with 2 species that undergo this kind of unique trait. But for bears, again, that breeding season occurs in June and July, and those cubs are born around the 1st of February, give or take, plus or minus a week or two on kind of either end of that. And those cubs, they're born, when they're born, they're about 8 ounces, 8 inches long. They can't see. Their eyes are closed. Their eyes stay closed for about 4 weeks. And they generally gain quite a bit of weight each week. So when we start to work those dens in the middle of March, we're generally seeing cubs that are around 5 to 6 weeks old, and they're generally around 5 to 6 pounds. Now, but by the time they enter that winter den with the female, when they turn, right before they're turning 1, they're already anywhere between 50 and 100 pounds. There's quite a bit of variability. It depends on food sources, depends on the sex of the yearling, but they pack on a whole lot of weight in the course of that first year. And then that tapers off, and that's similar to a lot of other species. And the cubs generally stay with the sow for about 18 months. The sow will kick them out around starting in May through June. Males disperse those long distances. So these are the young bears that we see showing up south of St. Louis oftentimes. These 1.5 to 2.5-year-old males that basically are seeking out an area to set up shop. They're getting pushed around by other bears. They're getting pushed around by humans and traffic and things like that. And they often go on these really long walkabouts before they kind of settle down into an area. And females generally stay quite a bit closer to where they were born. So oftentimes female bears' home range overlap a portion of their mother's home range. There's not a cooperation there or anything like that. They basically exclude each other or avoid each other temporally, but there is that spatial overlap. But as happens, there are outliers. And so we do see the occasional long-range female dispersal. We've had a couple in our study where we've had female young that have moved upwards of 50 miles away from their natal area. But that female component of the population is just slower to expand. So that's part of the reason why in many of these expansion areas, we see those males showing up for a number of years before we start getting females showing up in some of these areas. And it's just because that female component of the population is just slower to expand geographically just by those kind of dispersal characteristics that you see. Now, if you're out hiking in the woods, oftentimes we have folks wondering, what they should be looking for. What are some of the things that you might see if you're out in the Ozarks? How do you know a bear's been there, kind of thing? Obviously, tracks would be a really good indication. And bear tracks, don't believe what you see drawn on the internet. When you search, bear tracks, you'll see a lot of derivations of dog tracks or cat tracks. And it's just kind of the four-toed, oval-shaped track. As you can see from these pictures, bear tracks really resemble that of a human foot. And so they have 5 toes on each, 5 toe pads on each paw. Now, one of the things with black bears, those claw marks aren't always visible. So that top left photo, you can see those claws. They're quite noticeable, but in comparison to a grizzly bear, those claws are relatively small. And so when you think of grizzly bear footprints, paw prints, you see claw marks with grizzly bear tracks. With black bear tracks, dependent upon the substrate, you might not see any claw marks. You might see a couple. So the photo on the right, the bottom track shows a couple of claw marks, but not every claw registers. And then on the top track, you don't really see any claw marks. And so that is kind of typical of what you would see with bear tracks. And when you're thinking about how bears move across the landscape and where you might notice these tracks, a lot of what drives a bear is related to food. And so if you're in an area, excuse me, where you have abundant acorn mast, or it's the summer months and you've found a blackberry patch, you might look for trails that kind of lead up to those and look for tracks in those situations, because that's what bears would be looking for. So you're really looking at how the bears use the landscape, where are those food sources. And one thing about bears, when they go over the same path over and over again, they step in the same area. And so you will get very worn down literal footprints. It's not just a worn flat path that gets worn completely bare. You will have spots where that bear is putting its foot each single time. And so when a bear continually comes back to the same area, it's kind of a telltale sign, what animal is making these tracks. One, you can look at the size, but if it's just a general kind of grassy trail or something like that, where there's not good substrate to make out the distinguishing features of those tracks, often look for that. You might be able to pick out exactly where that animal's been stepping its foot each time it's come through. It's often re-stepping in the exact same area, so it creates these kind of telltale indentations in the ground that you could look for. And then scat, again, we're talking about, you're likely to see a bear, more likely to see a bear if you encounter it near an area where it's coming and going for food resources. But that scat's really dynamic. So it really depends on what the bear is eating at the time. And so during the spring and early summer, it contains a lot of vegetative matter, a lot of grasses. If they're eating succulent vegetation, it's often very dark in color. Now, when it switches over to berries or to hard mass, the contents and what's in that scat changes. And sometimes the shape even changes. So when you look at the two photos, the center photo and the left photo, that shape is really telltale for bear scat. It's distinguishable from coyote scat. Coyote scat has twists at the end of the different segments, so there's a big distinction there. And oftentimes, the scat that is most mistaken for bear scat is actually raccoon scat, and it's because it contains the same type of foods. And what will happen is raccoons use latrine sites. They deposit scat in the same area, and so oftentimes there is a very large quantity of scat, and it might contain birdseed, it might contain chokecherry pits, it might contain persimmon seeds, it might contain all of these different things, or blackberry seeds, all of these different things that bears would eat. But the size is generally the indication, and not the quantity of the scat, but the size of those actual segments. Obviously, bears are quite a bit bigger than raccoons. And we receive tons and tons of scat photos. If you have scat that you found and you're wondering what it might be, if it's bear, the best thing that you can do, as is shown in the picture on the left, put a ruler or something of a known size, like a dollar bill, down next to that scat so we can have an idea of scale. When we receive just a photo and there's nothing there that shows us scale. So this photo on, in the center here, there isn't really a whole lot that shows us scale unless you told us how big the rocks measured in that picture. So from that photo, it'd be hard to say. You could say, oh, well, it could be raccoon, it could be bear. We know that photo is bear scat, but when we just get something without that scale, it's often difficult to tell. And then the photo on the right is what it looks like when the bears are really just eating berries exclusively, or cherries exclusively. So there's the flesh and the skins and the pits and the seeds and things like that. And that makes up the majority of the scat. And that scat's often looser and doesn't have that distinctive shape like the two photos on the left do. So it is very dynamic. It changes quite a bit throughout the year. And if you have bears that are living in areas with human habitation, you might find corn in there. You might find bird seed. If a bear's eating dog food, the scat more resembles that of a domestic dog and the consistency of it. So it is quite dynamic dependent upon what the bear is eating. Now, we've been studying bears quite intensively since 2010. We had been monitoring the population passively prior to that, but we really started an intensive research project back in 2010, and this study really focused on the use of hair snares to collect DNA so that we could estimate the population. And so with this information, you can get individual bear identity based on the hair samples that are collected at these barbed wire hair snare sites. From that, you can then go through a statistical process and look at how many times individual bears revisited those sites and other sites and get at a population estimate from that. So this was the foundational work that we had done. This is kind of a study that's been done across the country on a variety of different bear populations, getting at that initial population estimate. And that population estimate told us that we had about 300 bears that didn't include cubs of the year back in 2012. But that estimate, that type of estimate, can't tell us how quickly the bear population is growing. So one of the things we shifted to focus on was looking at survival, recruitment, movements, habitat use, but really the survival and recruitment part is what dictates how fast a bear population grows. And so to do this, we visit winter dens and we follow collared females to their winter dens. We immobilize the female at the winter den, count the number of cubs, look at the sex ratios of the litter, look at the proportion of females that give birth each year within our study. And all of that specific information is then used to model population growth. So based on that initial population estimate of about 350 bears, when you include cubs of the year, we can use this information then to to get to the next population estimate over time, how quickly that population has grown. And so we do this den work. At the time when we do the den work, we check the female's collar, we replace it if needed, we get body measurements and things like that. So it gives us a wealth of information. And then if there are bears that we can't access during the winter, then during the winter denning season, we then switch to trapping in the summer, and we use big culvert traps. Basically, the bear has to walk into the trap. It's a trap that's on its own trailer, and the bear goes into it. We're able to immobilize the bear, check the condition of the collar, replace it if needed, and things like that. Now, we talked about how variable the types of dens that we see are, and a lot of that dictates whether or not we can actually access the bear. So the photo on the left is a bear that obviously has a den underneath a down tree. So really secure den, only has one opening. If the bear were to try to crawl out, it has to come out of that opening. And it's not very deep in this sense. So we're able to access the bear in that den. Now, when we have bears that use kind of a true network of caves, we can't access those bears. So we can't immobilize those bears. We'll set up cameras, count the number of cubs or yearlings that are with the bear. But this gives us a lot of really detailed information. And then during the summer bear trapping season, we also have the opportunity to add new bears to the study. So bears drop collars, collars malfunction. We do have some low level of mortality that occurs within our bear population. And so this opportunity, the summer trapping season, allows us to continue to maintain our sample size and continue to have bears added within that study. And so again, all of that survival and reproductive information really goes into this population model that looks at how quickly that bear population is growing. So we're able to include all of this Missouri specific data. And then for anything where we didn't have a good enough sample size, we looked to literature values so that we were more conservative in our model estimates. And that allowed us to get to a population estimate of between 540 bears and 840 bears statewide in 2019. Now, there is quite a range there, and that's because you can't go out and necessarily count every individual bear. Even with the initial population estimate, there is a range that occurs around that population estimate. But at the growth rate that we're seeing, we would expect this population to double in about 10 years. And with this information, not only are we getting that population information, we're also able to get a really detailed look at how bears use the landscape here in Missouri. So what are the important landscape features that are driving bear movement across the landscape? What does that look like for connectivity and bear range and the potential for bear range as that population continues to grow? And so the map on the right here, we were able to look at that very detailed GPS data off of those collars. So individual locations, we're talking several thousand locations per individual bear throughout the course of the time we have them collared, and really get an idea of how those core habitats are used. What's the size of those core habitat patches for both males and females? Males occupy a larger core area than females do, not surprising given that males often use more marginal habitats, and we do have that male component of the population that is dispersing at a quicker rate than the female component. But it also allows us to look at connectivity between these core patches. So are there areas within the state where we have really good connectivity and these linkages that facilitate that type of movement occur? Or are there areas where we're seeing less connectivity? Do we have barriers or pinch points that kind of funnel bears into certain locations? And so with that, we can identify some of these areas and then use that to help look at what that means for range expansion within the state of Missouri as that bear population continues to grow, as well as habitat management and planning and things like that, as things are done related to roads or anything like that. So we can look at that and see, and here in Missouri, when we think about barriers to movement, generally they are semi-permeable barriers, so we don't have hard barriers that bears cannot cross, but they are barriers nonetheless. And so large major roadways act in that type of barrier. Water often acts as that type of barrier, as well as agricultural areas. So bears generally like that connected forest. They are less likely to move through very large expanses of open land. And so really looking at this, and this photo on the right really looks at those core patches. So within the surrounding area, there's still other bear habitat around that, but this is identifying the linkages within those very important core habitat patches. And then the map on the left takes that to the next step. So looking at bear habitat at a larger geographic scale, looking at basically the state of Missouri as a whole, we can look at how that habitat and that connectivity might influence human-bear conflict. So the circles in blue are areas of the state where we've had reports of human-bear conflict. The circles in white are areas or towns, communities within the state where, based on those communities' juxtaposition within bear habitat, they are likely to experience human-bear conflicts as that bear population continues to grow. So this is a really great opportunity for us to look at what types of issues are we having in those communities that currently are experiencing some level of human-bear conflict, address those specifically through very targeted education, but also look to these areas that, based on their proximity to good bear habitat, are likely to have human-bear conflict in the future. How can we be proactive and work with those communities so that everyone is bear aware before that bear conflict even occurs? So thinking about, ideally, we have somebody who lives in one of those areas that are a white dot, and they look at their backyard and they go, wow, I need to take my bird feeders in. Bears are active this time of year. Or that trash can is not very secure. Now's my time to secure that trash can so when the bear does show up in this town, the bear doesn't get into it. So how can we take that to the next level and really work on that focused education? And this type of map and this type of study really helps us prioritize those efforts. And a lot of this really relates to our black bear management plan. So we recently updated our bear management plan back in 2019, and it's a plan that has 3 goals, and it's a really multifaceted plan. So you can see from the mission statement here, it's really looking at increasing bear awareness, minimizing human-bear conflict, and providing those recreational opportunities, but really the focus on managing that self-sustaining population of black bear within the state. And so goal 1 really focuses on using science-based methods to inform those management decisions. So research and monitoring, population management, habitat management, all of those things that can influence bear populations, and really using that information to kind of guide and prioritize research needs and management questions. Goal 2, looking at increasing that statewide awareness of the bear population and the management program through coordinated outreach and public education. And when you break down this goal, it really focuses on statewide outreach and very targeted outreach. So what message is important to different communities isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all. There is very basic information that is universal across the state. If you're going to camp or hike or live in bear country, there are some basic things that you need to know. But when you live in an area that has bears, dependent upon your neighborhoods, dependent upon what's going on within those neighborhoods and food availability around those areas, there might be some very specific messaging that can occur within those locations to really help focus on what's going on. So in some areas, it's bird feeders. Bird feeders are the biggest issue. We have residential areas that have bird feeders. Bears come in, they visit those bird feeders. Bears are long-lived, they have a very good memory, and they come back to those bird feeders over and over again. In other areas, it's trash management. So now we're talking about, it's not bird feeders that are drawing bears into those areas, it's the garbage cans. And we'll have in some locations bears that know garbage day, and they will come knock over garbage cans the night that people put them out. And so what are those specific messages that really help address those very specific types of issues that can occur, and oftentimes at the community level, because it's very important that everybody is understanding what they need to do to help minimize and address those human-bear conflicts and help prevent them from occurring. Because if you have one person who removes their bird feeders, but 10 other people have bird feeders on the block, that bear is still going to come in. And the counter to it, if you have 10 people that remove their bird feeders, but one keeps them out, that bear's still likely to come in. So really kind of taking that community-focused effort there also. And then minimizing and addressing human-bear conflicts when they do occur. So we have human-bear conflicts that occur within the state, and this happens. This is going to happen because we have bears and people sharing the same landscape. And it is unreasonable to think that we will 100% prevent human-bear conflicts across the board. And it's because a lot of this is dependent upon human behavior. What we do dictates how these bears often use that landscape, what foods are available to them, and then in turn influences the types of human-bear conflicts that occur. And so through education, through that targeted outreach, through individual site visits and things like that, we can do our best to really try to minimize those human bear conflicts. And we have staff that go out, do meetings, do events, go through neighborhoods and talk with residents when we have a bear that's been reported in a trash can, go door to door talking to other folks and saying, hey, this is what's going on. Here are the things that you can do to minimize this from happening here. But when those human bear conflicts occur, doing what we can to address them. So in this, the photo in the middle and the photo on the right is an example of electric fencing. And so we do a lot of proactive outreach related to electric fencing, talking to beekeeper organizations and things like that, talking about the benefits of electric fencing, basically getting that fence in place before a bear even finds your hives. But then also in the reactive sense, if we have a situation where a bear gets into a chicken coop or gets into beehives, or sometimes even gets into a dumpster, utilizing that electric fencing to help get that bear to move on. We have temporary electric fencing that will go out and help residents put up so that they can have their hives or chicken coop protected in the meantime while they're going out to get there. And when we talk to beekeepers, when we talk to folks that keep chickens and things like that, the message really is this is part of it, right? This is part of the startup cost. So if you live in bear country and you want to keep bees, you should think about not just the investment in the bees and the hives and the supers and what you need to do to get your hives going, but also the investment in what you need to do to keep those hives secure so that bears don't develop that behavior and come into them. So there's a lot of the different educational efforts that go on, and then kind of addressing those conflicts when they do occur. And we have staff that are trained in helping to manage these human bear conflicts, trained in aversive conditioning. And so if we have a bear that is persistent, that continues to come into some of these locations, we have staff that are trained in that aversive conditioning. And really the idea is that you're trying to give that bear a negative stimulus, get it to move on, find natural foods so that the landowner then has the opportunity to fix whatever the issue was that was drawing that bear in. Aversive conditioning isn't a silver bullet. It's not going to solve every bear problem. And bears do revisit these locations, but it oftentimes buys enough time for that resident to fix what brought that bear in to that food source in the first place. And then in those more extreme situations, unfortunately, that old adage of fed bear is a dead bear sometimes does come up, and it's unfortunate when it happens because a lot of this can be addressed on the front end through those more preventative measures. And this kind of segues very nicely into the Be Bear Aware messaging. So our Be Bear Aware program is quite extensive. We do a lot of media releases, presentations, working with communities and things like that. Our management plan focuses on expanding this. What are some of the other areas? We can develop more of that targeted messaging and more of that statewide outreach to get the word out about bears. But basically, to be bear aware, it really comes down to making common sense practices and choices about food management. So bears are really attracted to those food sources. And so when you think about what would a bear eat, if a raccoon would be attracted to it, so would a bear, right? So garbage, bird feeders, pet food, grills and smokers, all of those kinds of things can draw bears in to residential areas, into neighborhoods, into homesteads and farms and things like that. So securing those food sources is really, really important. And then talking to your neighbors. So if you do have a bear that comes in and finds some of these food sources, it really has to be a community-wide effort to make sure that those food sources get cleaned up so that bear doesn't develop the pattern of behavior and then continue to come in. Now, if you happen to see a bear in your neighborhood, best thing you can do, make noise to try to give that bear a negative stimulus. So basically, you would not expect necessarily that that bear is going to turn tail and run as fast as it can, especially if it's sitting at a bird feeder. So oftentimes the bear will feed, and when it's ready, it'll get up and move on. But banging pots and pans, using an air horn, basically giving that bear that negative stimulus helps. And then after the bear leaves the area, take a look at what attracted it and try to remove any of those food sources and secure those food sources. And then if you do live in an area where you have a persistent bear that's coming in, those aversive conditioning techniques are really useful from our trained staff, so they can come out and help with those situations. Now, if you're out hiking in the woods and you happen to encounter a bear, or if you happen to encounter a bear in your neighborhood, the best thing you can do, talk to the bear in a calm voice. You can raise your arms up over your head. Basically, you're making yourself look bigger. And just back away, give that bear an escape route. You don't run from wild animals. It can initiate a chase response and a follow response. Basically, you're just backing out of the area. Hey bear, letting the bear know that you're there and letting that bear leave. Now, black bears, one of their defense mechanisms is running up a tree. So oftentimes they will retreat up a tree if they feel threatened. This is not the opportunity to call the neighbors in. It's not the opportunity for a photo. It's not the opportunity to sit there and watch that bear. That bear will come down when it feels that the threat is gone. And if there are people that are around, if there are dogs that are around, that bear will likely sit up there until it's dark out and all of those different disturbances have left. So it's not uncommon if a bear gets run up a tree, it's not uncommon for that bear to sit there for an extensive period of time and wait for that kind of what they perceive as a danger to go away. If you're camping and hiking in bear country, a lot of times folks will travel in groups, make noise while you're out there hiking. And basically, this just lessens the likelihood that you are going to run into a bear in a surprise situation. Basically, where you surprise it, it surprises you. You want to keep food secure if you are paddling in the Ozarks, camping, backpacking, any of those kinds of activities. Think about how you keep your trash secure, how you keep your food secure. If you are in an area that has where your vehicle is there, keep your food and things like that in a locked vehicle with the windows rolled up. You never keep food in your tent. Keep your cooking areas and your sleeping areas separate. If you don't have the ability to lock up your food, if you don't have a bear-proof container that you backpack with, or you don't have access to the vehicle to lock it up, there are ways to hang your food, and there's guidance on our website that tells you how high it needs to be, how far from other trees it needs to be, to help ensure that the bears don't get access to that. Now, if you are going to carry bear spray, that is entirely your choice. Bear spray is designed to stop an imminent attack or stop a bear from imminently making contact with you. It is not a preventative measure. It's not meant to be sprayed on your gear or your tent. It's not meant to be sprayed as you're going down the trail to try to deter bears. It is literally something that is meant to stop a bear from making physical contact with you, but know how to use it. So bear spray compared to human pepper spray is very different. It's deployed very differently. Human pepper spray comes out in a very fine stream, and you're generally shooting it towards the eyes of a person. For a bear, that bear spray actually comes out as a fog. And you are trying to create basically a curtain of this pepper spray fog that as the bear is coming towards you is going to hit and deter that bear. And that's your opportunity to leave the area. But if you're going to carry it, know how to use it. There's tons of good videos online that you can look at proper deployment of bear spray. Keep it where you have it accessible. Bear spray doesn't do you any good buried down in the bottom of your backpack. It's something that's meant to be carried on your belt loop if you are going to carry it. But making sure that you're keeping food secure and using those common sense hiking practices is really important if you are going to be out in bear country. If you're hunting in bear country, keep a clean camp, avoid or alert bears of your presence. If you happen to see a bear while you're out there hunting, make noise, let that bear know you're there. There have been instances where bears explore tree stands. They might climb up, and sometimes it's they get whiff of a cover scent. Sometimes it's a curiosity kind of thing. And if it's a tree stand that's been left out, sometimes it's the foam on the seat that they're attracted to. And so in these instances, it's curiosity, it's not aggression, but you should be alerting the bear of your presence right away. So you shouldn't be letting it come up the ladder so you're getting a great picture of it or anything like that. You're letting that bear know that you're there well before it starts climbing up that tree. And if you are lucky enough to have a bear sighting, by all means report it to us. Those sightings are really important for us. It allows us to track, where we are seeing bears showing up in these expansion areas, where bears are occurring across the landscape. And if it's related to any kind of human-bear conflict, it's really important for us because we can start to see, is there a pattern of behavior here? Are we getting a lot of bird feeder reports that then warrant more information going out to those communities? Or is it trash can issues or things like that? And oftentimes those reports from the public are the first that alert us to some of those things that are going on. And there's sometimes situations where we get out to a neighborhood and we got one report or a couple reports of a bear getting into trash. And when we get there, they're like, oh, this has been going on for a year. And at that point, that bear has learned those behaviors and that bear is repeating those behaviors. And it's a lot harder to get that bear to move on and change those behaviors. So if we can get word of those types of things going on right off the bat, oftentimes proactive measures can really help address that early on in those types of situations. So if you are lucky enough to have a bear sighting, go to mdc.mo.gov/reportbears and submit that sighting to us. You can upload upload a photo here. A lot of the sightings we get are trail camera photos, and those are great. We log all the reports that we get in our database and look at that. And as I said, it kind of helps us just look at, where we're starting to see some of these bears show up across the landscape, as well as what types of issues might be cropping up that would require a little bit more direct contact. If you submit a report, you will get an email from somebody in the bear program. And it's a great opportunity. If you have additional questions, you can submit those questions with the report, and you can go back. We'll go back and forth with you and provide some of that additional information as needed. If it's just simply, hey, I saw a bear, and that's all you're interested in, we certainly appreciate those also. And then if you're interested in more information about bears, the management plan, the potential hunting season on bears, you can go to mdc.mo.gov/bears. There's a lot of information there. You can link to our Be Bear Aware messaging, the research project, all of the things right there. And related to the hunting season, we have gone through the proposal to talk about the potential future hunting season for bears here in Missouri. The public comment period just closed within the last week and a half-ish, and our commission is going to be voting on that in December. So I would say just keep an eye out to the notifications that come after our commission meetings, or visit mdc.mo.gov/bears if you're interested in any more information related to that. And with that, I am happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Laura. That was a great talk. We have
No problem.
a lot of questions. So I'm going to start with our first one. Do black bears break into campers in Missouri?
So it can happen, yeah. And so in instances like that, oftentimes a bear that is going to break into a camper, break into a cabin, break into a home, has already gone through kind of that progression of finding food. And so we have had instances where we've had bears try to break into homes. Luckily here, it does not happen that often, but it is something that occurs when bears start to develop that progression of behavior. So oftentimes, you will get a bear that may visit bird feeders, may visit dumpsters and trash cans. They start to get a little bit more comfortable. They visit the area more frequently. They start coming up on porches looking for food. And then it's not every bear is going to do it, but then in some instances, they will take advantage. When I was out east, we had instances where bears were ripping the windows off of cabins to get into the cabins in search of food. And so it's really important to be proactive on that end, just so the bears don't develop down that kind of progression of negative behavior.
Okay. Is the chest blaze specific to each bear? I.e., does each bear have a distinctive recognizable blaze?
So not necessarily. So there are some bears that don't have any chest blaze, and then others have very, very noticeable chest blazes. And oftentimes, just like with pelt coloration, we might see a similar chest blaze in members of the same litter, where it might be a little bit genetic there. And we might see some indications where we capture a couple of bears with what are seemingly similar looking blazes, but it is not something that we would necessarily use as a unique identifier, although it can be helpful. So there are some where it's distinct enough, and it's the only bear we've seen in the area where we get that bear on photo, we can say, okay, well, this is the same one I think that we've seen here, kind of thing.
Okay, this is a question from Margaret. She wants to know why they were named black bears. Did it have something to do with the color?
So most likely, the majority of black bears are that black phase color. So that is the most common coloration.
Do black bears hibernate along with grizzly bears?
So they do, yes. And that hibernation factor really depends on where in North America you are. So bears in Missouri don't hibernate as long as bears in Minnesota would. And the further north you go, the longer that hibernation period occurs.
Here's another one. Has a bear ever been seen within the city of St. Louis?
Not to my knowledge at this point, not within the city of St. Louis, but I will say it's not out of the realm of possibility. So it's, bears can utilize a lot of different habitat corridors. When I worked in Massachusetts, we had a bear swim the Cape Cod Canal and go on a long foray on Cape Cod. And we had bears show up literally right on the doorsteps of Boston. And so it's not something we've had happen yet, but it's not out of the realm of possibility from happening.
What kind of insects do black bears eat?
A variety. So when they're digging up those logs, a lot of times they're looking at grubs. So they may be looking for termite larvae, beetle larvae, things like that. When they are digging up ground hornets' nests, and even when they're getting into beehives, they are really interested in the larvae. The larvae are very fat-rich, nutrient-rich, and so they will eat a whole suite of insects. And a lot of times it just depends on what's abundant and what they can find as they're going through the forest, kind of tearing up those down trees and things like that.
Okay, I'm going to combine a couple questions here. Can or will black bears attack you? What should you do if hiking and you come across a black bear? Some of which you already addressed.
Yeah, so it is possible that a bear could attack a human. There have been instances in other parts of the country where black bears have attacked people. We have never had a bear attack here in Missouri, but it is something that's important to keep in mind, which is part of that bear aware messaging. You know, what should you be doing when you're out there hiking, making noise, making sure you're alerting a bear of your presence, not putting yourself in a situation that basically causes that bear to be uncomfortable. But if you were out hiking and you encountered a bear, backing away, letting that bear have an escape route is the best thing that you can do. If the bear goes up a tree, again, you let that bear come down on its own. You leave the area. It's not an opportunity to just sit there and watch it. And if you were ever in a situation where you were out hiking and you felt like a bear was following you, so the bear was kind of following close behind, maybe going on and off the trail, things like that, that is something that has happened. It's not common by any means. It hasn't happened here in Missouri, but it has happened elsewhere in North America. That's more of a predatory behavior. In those instances, you're making noise, trying to get that bear to move on. Those are those situations where, again, report every bear sighting to us. But in those instances, if you were to have a bear that was exhibiting those kind of behaviors, that would warrant a call to your local MDC office, conservation agent. Even in some of those situations, you can contact your local police. But again, those types of behaviors are extremely, extremely rare. The majority of sightings that we have are passive sightings. A bear crosses a road, or a bear crosses the trail, or somebody gets a bear on their trail camera, things like that. Now, if a bear were to make physical contact with you, with black bears, you fight back. So most folks think about grizzly bears and, if a bear attacks, you play dead. With the black bear, that's not what you do. With the black bear, you fight back with everything you have. Grab sticks, grab rocks, grab whatever gear you have, and you fight back to deter that bear from attacking you. While it happens, we have a lot of bears across the country that live in very close proximity to people. Those types of negative interactions are very, very rare. But it's good just to kind of think about that as you're out there hiking.
Do bears eat fish? Rarely.
Yeah, so here in Missouri, fish is not a primary component. If they came across one, I wouldn't be surprised if they were to eat it. They're opportunistic. But a lot of times what you think of are bears in the Pacific Northwest, where they've adapted to eating fish during those very seasonal fish runs and things like that. We don't see that here in Missouri. They're primarily focused on those seasonal vegetative sources and things like that.
Do they have a particular time of day that they're most active?
It can be quite variable. And so a lot of times bears are active during the day. They're a little bit more active early in the morning, in the evening. They are less active during the overnight hours, although there are some bears that adjust that behavior. So in areas where bears are using that human-dominated landscape, they are often more active when humans are less active. So they might be active in the middle of the night because then they're not bumping into humans and things like that. And then a lot of it is quite seasonal. So if it's a female with cubs during the breeding season, she's trying to avoid males. Oftentimes those females are moving during the hottest part of the day compared to when the males are moving in the early morning and in the evening hours. So they are active during the day, but it can be quite variable dependent upon the season and the sex and the age of the bear.
What do you estimate is the biological carrying capacity for black bears in Missouri?
So we don't have an estimate of biological carrying capacity for bears here in the state. The biological carrying capacity of our forest is likely quite high. We have a productive forest. We have a very large area of the state that is forested. And when we look to bears in other parts of the country, they can live at quite high densities. So we have a low density bear population here. New Jersey, as an example, is one of the parts parts of the country that has among the highest bear densities. What we're likely to see is that in many areas, social carrying capacity, so the tolerance level of humans on the landscape, is often quite a bit lower than that biological carrying capacity for bears.
This one I believe you already addressed, but I'll go ahead and ask it. Does hibernation depend on the latitude of where they live, shorter in Florida, longer, for example, in Minnesota?
It does, yes. And especially for those bears that are not giving birth in the winter den. So in areas like Florida, you may have bears that slow down a bit but remain quite active. But those pregnant females, the ones that are going to give birth, they will always enter that winter den because they have to. The cubs won't be large enough to move around for quite some time. So they always enter that winter den. And again, it relates to those food sources. So yeah, the further north you go, the earlier food sources become limited. The further south you go, the longer those food sources tend to stay available.
Are they negatively impacted from eating human processed food?
They can be, yeah. So bears exhibit some of the same issues that dogs would exhibit if they eat chocolate. So there have been instances where there's been bear mortalities in other states from consuming chocolates or chocolate-based foods and things like that. But the biggest negative impact is not necessarily related to their physiology, but more related to the behaviors that then comes with the consumption of those human-associated foods and what that means for them, oftentimes becoming more habituated to people, basically more tolerant of being around people, more tolerant of being out in the open and active and more visible. And then those more bold behaviors where they may start with pet food, escalate to breaking into chicken coops, and then can escalate into breaking into a home in search of food. So less physiology, more behavior, that often is the negative impact from that.
What is the greatest threat to black bears?
So in general, bears don't have a ton of natural predators, and so anthropogenic causes of mortality are really kind of the primary causes of mortality. So areas where you have vehicle collisions, instances where bears are being removed because of the nuisance behavior, things like that, areas where you have a hunting season. Those are generally the mortality factors that kind of factor into that bear population. Bears are generally a very long-lived species, and there's not a lot of natural mortality factors that kind of come into that sense. But when you think about bears as a whole and just black bear conservation in general, maintaining that habitat connectivity and those tracts of important habitats, very important for bears since they are that forest dwelling species. And then also really working to address those human bear conflicts, because that social tolerance is often dictated by, you know, how people perceive their interactions with bears. And if you live in an area where you are frequently having human bear conflicts, bears are really relying on those human associated food sources. How individuals perceive those bears tends to be a little bit worse than where that's lessened. And so in terms of bear conservation, it's really multifaceted. But the biggest challenge that we face as managers often is related to those human bear conflicts and how you manage this large carnivore living oftentimes in very close proximity to humans. You know, when I worked out east in Massachusetts, we had bears that would den under people's porches and in their backyards and in little teeny tiny wood lots right next to hospital parking lots. And you know, so kind of the human component really plays into how you manage that population, how you work with that population, and how you even talk about that population.
How good is their genetic diversity after all this time since their reintroduction?
Yeah, so here in Missouri, what we've seen is we have good genetic diversity. We have both kind of remnants of what seem to be a remnant population here. So original Missouri bears or Ozark bears that were here. So some lineages there. And then as well as the genetics from those bears in Arkansas. And as we talked about, there is movement across the landscape. So our bears don't occur on an island. So we have that gene flow between Arkansas and that robust bear population in Arkansas. And with the bears that came from Arkansas, they did come from multiple areas. They weren't only from one specific geographic area. So, while we are a population of about 8,000 bears between those three states, we still do have that gene flow amongst that. When we look at the genetic diversity here in Missouri, it's a little bit lower compared to Arkansas, and that's kind of a byproduct of that range expansion. But as that bear population continues to grow, hopefully we still do have that gene flow that's occurring to keep that genetic diversity up.
Will state parks need to implement requirements for campers to use bear-proof containers?
So there are some state parks that already have that, actually. So there are a couple of state parks down in the southern part of the state that have bear-resistant trash cans, bear-resistant dumpsters, and things like that. But we are at that point with our population where that's part of the conversation. And when we redid that black bear management plan in 2019, that was in cooperation and collaboration with the National Park Service, the Forest Service, and Missouri DNR state parks, because bears oftentimes occur on those protected spaces, those public lands, not necessarily, we do have bears that occur on private lands, most definitely, but all of those different landowners within the state kind of have kind of the likelihood that bears are going to be occurring in these areas. And so that's part of the conversation. Where should we be implementing kind of those bear resistant cans? Where is that needed? But this is one of those challenges. We have a lot of folks, whether it's in residential areas, whether it's commercial dumpsters and things like that, switching over to bear resistant cans, there's a cost associated with it. The trash hauler has to be willing to be able to dump those dumpsters and things like that. And there's a learning curve with how you use those. I was in Gatlinburg, Tennessee not that long ago for a human bear conflicts workshop. And you walk down Gatlinburg, there's bear resistant dumpsters all over the place. And if they're not used properly, it doesn't matter. There's bear prints on those trash cans, the lids are open. And so a bear resistant dumpster is only as resistant as the people make it, and if it's used properly. So those are part of the conversations that are happening. And we absolutely have campgrounds and things like that that are starting to look to implementing those types of things to minimize the potential for human bear conflict.
How long is a black bear's lifespan?
So it's variable. Females tend to live longer than males do. They can live up to about 25 years in the wild. Males are a little bit lower on that end, just because they tend to move larger distances, makes them more susceptible to those anthropogenic forms of mortality. But they can be quite long-lived, and that is part of the challenge when you're dealing with human bear conflicts. So you may have a bear that is in its teens, and if it's a female raising litters every other year, and if that's a bear that's getting into bird feeders and remembering where those bird feeders are and coming back year after year after year, educating its cubs on how to find those easy food sources and things like that, you can see how that kind of can progress across the bear population and even within those geographic areas. But they are, compared to other species, they are quite long-lived.
Some of this you also addressed in your talk, but I'll combine a couple questions here. How are they impacted by environmental changes? Are they able to adapt to human-induced changes in habitat? Is food the primary reason for habitat connectivity via rivers?
So I'll try to touch on all of those, but yeah, they are quite adaptable. So when you look back historically at kind of the early research related to bears, it was really thought that you needed vast areas of protected forest that was connected so that bears could persist. And in actuality, they've adapted quite a bit. And so when we look at the northeastern US and even some areas out west, you have bears that occur in extremely fragmented environments. There is still that forest connectivity, but it is highly fragmented. And so they can use that and they can adapt to it. When I was working in Massachusetts, we had bears that lived within towns, and they were using little 2-acre and 5-acre wood lots that then connected to some bigger tracts of forested land. But they are quite adaptable. So there is that susceptibility to those human-induced changes. If there's different types of changes in the habitat, the bears will adjust their behavior, but over time they can be quite adaptable. And food oftentimes is that primary driving factor. So when natural foods are less abundant, they often seek out those human-associated food sources because it's easier. And then in terms of that habitat connectivity, a lot of it can relate to bears seeking out other food sources, if they're within their home range, looking around and moving through that home range, seeking out those food sources. But that connectivity also plays into the dispersal of bears. So when you have those young males that are dispersing, that habitat connectivity is what facilitates that dispersal. And so if you have areas that are a lot more fragmented or barriers to movement, you might see some of those negative impacts related to anthropogenic mortality. So, I mean, in some areas, we get bears hit on the road. We have bears that are hit on I-44. We have bears that are hit on Highway 60. And a lot of times it's those young dispersing bears. And so that habitat connectivity really factors into oftentimes the dispersal over larger geographic areas. And then if you're talking about resident bears, yeah, that connectivity plays into how that bear utilizes the forest that makes up its home range.
If bears give birth to up to 5 cubs in a season, why is the growth rate so low at 9%? What is the survival rate of cubs in entire lifespan? How many cubs would a female bear give birth to?
So there's some variability around there. And so the litters of 5 have been documented in areas that have very highly productive forests as well as anthropogenic food. So in the eastern United States, there have been litters of 5. We have not had a litter of 5 here during our research project. We recently documented a litter of 4. Our average litters are about 2 cubs per year. And that's pretty typical when you look at other studies across the country. So there's a lot of variability there. And the litter size also can depend on age, and the cub survival can depend on age of the sow. So bears can be reproductive during their second year of life. They can breed when they are 2. They would give birth in the den when they are 3. When I was out east in areas that had high anthropogenic foods, we had large females. We used to see bears giving birth at the age of 3. It's less common here. We don't see that as often. We have bears that are utilizing those more natural food sources. And so our bear first litters tend to occur when the bears are 4 or 5. And so all of that plays into the growth rate of that population. And then those younger bears, the litter sizes are often small. And in many cases, those first litters don't survive that first year. So you'll see a female that may give birth to a cub or 2 during her first, when she has her first litter. That litter may not survive. And so the very next year, she may have a litter of a cub or 2. We have a couple of our research bears that for the time that we've been studying, we've always seen them with 3 cubs. We have others where it's 2. And then there is that variability. So again, dependent on the body condition of the female and things like that, that can factor in. Cub survival is higher for female bears than it is for males. And that's not surprising. Males are oftentimes the ones that are a little bit more likely to roam around. And so we do see higher survival rates a little bit for female cubs. And then generally, once the bears get into that 4 to 5-year-old age class, survival rates are very, very high. So survival for our adult female bears is anywhere between 95% and 99% annually. So there's very, very high adult survival rates. Bears often experience the greatest mortality risk when they are in that dispersal age class. So basically from when they're about 1.5 to when they're about 3.5. And that's typically when they're most vulnerable to the different mortality factors that can come into play.
Will black bears harm each other?
They can. And so so they are not a territorial species. However, they basically there is some social structure there. And so you may have large males that compete for females during the breeding season. You may have large males that compete for high quality food sources. And so oftentimes, especially during the breeding season, when we are bear trapping in the summer, we will see some of our bigger males with battle wounds, ears missing, scars across their eyes, bite wounds on their face. And for some of these bears, you're talking scars over the course of many, many years of those types of male to male interactions that can occur. And there is the possibility that males will kill cubs of the year. And if a female were to lose her cubs during the breeding season, she would then come into estrus. And so the idea is with that type of infanticide that can occur, it's been documented in black bears. It doesn't happen as frequently as it does in other bear species, but it can. So the female would then be able to be bred. And that's why we oftentimes see spatial avoidance. So females utilizing certain areas when the big males are not using those areas. If we're summer trapping for bears and we have a big boar, a male that comes in and is using the trap site heavily, it's very unlikely that we have females that come in because they just typically avoid those areas with those bigger males. So there's a variety of different things that can occur there. But the most frequent interactions that we see kind of the effects of are those scars on those bigger males from that fighting between one another.
When is a black bear considered fully grown?
So they do grow throughout a good proportion of their life, but generally by the mid-teens, they'll have reached their peak weight. And so when we trap some of our bigger males, I'm talking in the summer months, they're about 350-ish pounds to 400 pounds. Those bears in the fall would be pushing 500 pounds. Those are generally male bears that are in their teens. And then as they get older, just they kind of decline in body condition as they age. And so you'll see those bears that are in their teens, they're kind of in peak prime body condition. That's when they're generally at their heaviest, but their weight fluctuates substantially. So you may have a bear that we trap in the summer that weighs 150 pounds. And when we work that bear in the winter in March, she weighs 200 pounds. And we know she's already lost a substantial portion of the weight that she's gained in the fall. So their body weight fluctuates a whole lot. And when we have poor natural food years, we see the effects of that. So back in 2018, we had a dry summer. The berry crop wasn't great. We saw bears that were on the smaller end compared to how we've seen them in the past. You know, bears that typically are in the 180 range might be down to 160 during the summer. But there's a huge amount of fluctuation there. So a bear that you see in the fall and into the winter is at the largest. During the spring and the summer, they're at their smallest weight, basically, because they've lost all of that weight that they've gained during that denning season. And it takes them a while to build back up those fat stores so they get back to that heavy weight again.
And we've got, well, really, we're almost out of time. So we're going to end with this last question. Laura, what are some of your most amazing experiences?
Oh gosh. I mean, I've been very lucky to have been working with bears for the better part of a decade at this point. And I think for me, I'm never lost on kind of the awe that I have when I do work with them. I think seeing the different types of dens and things like that is always interesting. And, you know, I may work one bear one year and the bear behaves totally differently the next year when I go to work it in the den. And so there is that part. I think for me, some of the most interesting things have been some of the den sites. We had a bear that was missing. We could not find this bear's collar signal for months. We did not know where it went. We figured she was somewhere on the periphery of her range. And once she entered that winter den, we were not finding her. We ended up getting a report from the Cave Research Foundation that partners with Mark Twain National Forest to map the cave systems within Mark Twain. Well, this individual was crawling through, mapping this cave, goes down about 15 to 20 meters, turns a corner, shines his light, and then sees eyes looking back at him. Oh. And then sees ears, and then sees more eyes and more ears and the collar, and backs out that whole distance as fast as he can because it's just a narrow tube. So we knew the bear was in there. We figured it's got to be this missing bear. It's the only bear with a collar that we haven't seen yet, that we haven't been able to find. And so we get there, we get to the opening of the cave, and I get zero signal. And so we're like, well, I mean, maybe the bear's gone, kind of thing. I crawl in partway, and as I'm going through, I have a GoPro on a long stick. And with that, I can't get anywhere close to the turn in the cave to even see. And so we back our way out. We're not going any further. We're not doing anything else. We set up cameras, and that bear comes out with her 2 yearlings, and she continues to rake leaves in. And over the course of the winter, we had pictures of bobcats going into the opening of the cave and coming back out. And so just seeing kind of that variety that we get. And then the very next year, that bear was denned under the base of a tree. easy den, wide open. And then 2 years later, we had a totally different bear use that exact same cave system. So I think just being able to study them over this duration. And for me, my initial work out east was with a very, very large, high density bear population and a very high density human population. To come here to Missouri, where we're at the stage where we have this recolonizing and expanding bear population, it's just been a really interesting opportunity. And, you know, I'm always kind of grateful that and kind of shocked that this is my job, that this is what I get to do. And here in Missouri, we've got a lot of great habitat. We've got this growing bear population, a brand new management plan. So we are really entering a very exciting phase in bear management. There's just a lot going on right now.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. Everybody, thank you for joining us. And Laura, thank you so much for great, fabulous talks.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and log off. We did post a link to our online program survey in the chat window. So we would appreciate if you were able to take a moment or two and fill that out and let us know what you thought about tonight's event, and let us know if there are topics you'd like to hear more about in the future. Thank you for joining us this evening. Good night, everybody.